to the Shades of Entrepreneurship, where we interview entrepreneurs to inspire the future entrepreneur. I'll be your host, Mr. Gabriel Flores. So grab a drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. My next guest founded Social Tables, which was acquired by Blackstone-owned Comet in 2018. Now the author of The Quest, the definitive guide to finding belongings, and the founder and CEO of Assemble Hospitality Group and another. Please welcome Don Berger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shades of Entrepreneurship. This is your host, Mr. Gabriel Flores. Today, I have Don Berger, founder of a community building platform, Social Tables, which I'm very excited about. Recently, actually acquired as well in 2018. He's also a trailblazer in the art of fostering community and connection. And he's also an author, recently writing the book, The Quest of Definitive Guide to Finding Belongings, which is actually a Forbes book. And we are going to get into all of that. But first, Don, go ahead and introduce yourself. Who is Don Berger?
So my name is Don. It's spelled Dan, pronounced Don. It's a Hebrew name. I moved to the States when I was 9 from Israel. Didn't speak a word of English. And I grew up in New York City, 20 years there. Moved to DC for 10 years to go to grad school, where I started my last business. And now I'm in Boise, Idaho. I'm married to Jen, and we have a 2-month-old daughter named Sella Eden.
Oh man, so you are literally in the thick of it with a 2-month. I got a 4-year-old and a soon-to-be 2-year-old going on 13. My goodness, my friend, you are at that 2-month stage, so I commend you. So, Don, tell us about first. Give us a little background. You mentioned you're from New York, so give us a little history, kind of who you are, and you mentioned your name is Hebrew in nature. I'm really excited to kind of hear a little bit more about that. So first, give me a little bit more about background, and then I would love to kind of hear about your transition into what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe myself is through the traumas I endured, because that's the color of life, I guess. It makes us who we are. My first, the first trauma I experienced, and when I talk about trauma, by the way, I do recognize that everybody in the world had trauma, even if you grew up, in an English manor, riding horses to a billionaire royal family, you still had traumas. So the point of traumas is that they're our own, and everybody's pain is at a maximum. So whether I poke you or whether I light you on fire and you don't know the other, anything else, that's your level 10 pain. So my first kind of trauma was adoption. I was adopted when I was 5 days old. My biological mother made the decision to adopt me, to give me up for adoption when I was in the womb. So from a very kind of like since conception, basically, I was told I don't belong with my biological mom. So that was kind of my first trauma. My second trauma, and these are kind of like what I would call belonging traumas. There are so many other categories, but the second belonging trauma was when my adoptive parents divorced. And this nuclear family I was brought into when I was 2 years old disappeared in front of my eyes. And my dad essentially abandoned me. And the fact he didn't invite me to his wedding was indicative of that. Kind of missed weekly appointments and things like that. So my second trauma was essentially abandonment by my dad. And my third trauma, belonging trauma, was when I was 8 years old. And my mom moved us to the States so she can be together with an American boyfriend at the time. She married him. And that was a trauma in and of itself, because it was what has been referred to as negotiating identities, negotiating cultures. And that's what I had to do at the age of 8. So that's kind of, I think, a really good backdrop for what has made me who I am today. But after that, I was a product of public schools, raised by 2 social workers, professors of social work. So raised in a intellectual family, but middle class. Went to public schools my whole life, with the exception of grad school. And from a very young age, in order to battle the social anxiety, I just kind of secluded myself to the computer, and that's when I learned how to program. And when I left business school, I didn't want to follow the traditional routes of most people. So I quit my consulting job and started my last business, which went on to become a $20 million a year um, event planning software platform that I sold for 5 times that 7 years after I started it.
Oh, I love it. And I love your backstory. In fact, folks, I got to be completely transparent. When me and Don first got on this a call, I actually pronounced his name Dan because it is written that way, and he actually corrected me. It is Don, and then he kind of provided his background, and I think that too, folks. I think that is also very important when you're thinking about belonging, especially with the way Don was kind of talking about it. Individual names is very important, and understanding how to properly pronounce those individual names is very important. My name is Gabriel. I've kind of grew up since the second grade being called Gabe. Now, I would encourage all the folks listening right here, right now, please call me Gabriel. My name is Gabriel. I would love for you to call me Gabriel, not Gabe, right? Now, with that said, it's taken
Yeah,
me
it's
30 years.
presumptuous to
Yeah, but
call
it's taken
you
me,
to shorten it.
yeah, and it's taken me 30 years though to feel that confidence, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens is if you don't kind of if you don't alter yourself to be part of that name, then you no longer feel you belong, right? And that exclusion, a feeling of exclusion in any community really erodes confidence. It really erodes. I'll be completely transparent. When I was in school, I was very lack of confidence. I was one of those guys that probably didn't really care about school when I was, in high school, and really focused about making the jokes versus making the right work because I just felt out of place all the time, And so if I felt out of place, well, why not make it a bigger, just lash out. So I felt even more out of place essentially. And then you're starting to see this transition with DEI in the workspace, right? Let's talk a little bit about now you sold your business and you start going into, let's talk about that transition from you selling your business. And then how did that kind of come into this social tables?
Yeah. So, so Social Tables is the business that I sold, and the root, the business was a SaaS company, software as a service, and it was an event planning platform. So essentially, the category or subcategory we're in is event design. So basically, floor plans. And I started it because when I went to a wedding when I was a little younger, I experienced tremendous social anxiety. It was the first American wedding, and I was like, "Oh my God!" See, because in Israel, like a wedding is like going with a T-shirt and like eating while you're standing and like talking or whatever. It's much more kind of laid back. In fact, when I went to my brother's wedding in Israel, the cab driver who drove me there parked his cab, and I didn't realize. And then I saw him at the buffet line, and I said to the cab driver, like, "What are you doing here?" He was like, "Oh, I was hungry." I was like,
Awesome.
I swear to God.
That's great. And man, that's something that Latinos would do too. I'm not gonna lie. You gotta let the
I
anal
was like, "What the
taxi driver. He
fuck are
might
you
come
doing
in.
here, dude?" Like, so anyway,
Oh,
so
that's great.
so then I came to this like buttoned up culture where it's like, oh, you get a seated meal, and I was like, fuck, like who am I gonna sit with? Like, and by the way, where are the cute girls? Because I mean, weddings are a good place to meet people. So I was like, well, what if I saw? Gosh, if I just had access to the guest list and I knew who was at my table, and then I can look them up on Facebook, that would be awesome. So I came up with the concept of social tables at the time. It was like a social seating chart. And this is 2011, where the social graph and social networking was really picking up. So I was like, let's create a small social network at the table level while giving the planners a tool to plan the event. And then we realized people actually don't want to socialize the seating chart, and they just want to plan the event. And it became this event design platform. And from very, very early on, I think 2014, we put out our first diversity report, which is something nobody did at the time. We were the first tech company in the DC area to do that. And we even included generation. So first generation, for those who may know, 1.5 generation is if you came here in childhood. First generation is if you were born to immigrants. So we actually even included that in our diversity report. And I would say I was much more of an activist CEO than I probably am today with my new venture, but for sure, kind of doing like DEI stuff before it was a thing. And that includes inclusivity in terms of like creating shared artifacts, like the values, the norms, the vision, the mission. All that was a work product created by the team. And that's equity right there. And that's inclusivity. I mean, equity was literally equity because we were an employee owned business. So I was doing DEI, whether it's the diversity reports and really hiring diverse candidates, whether it's including people on the capitalization table, or whether it's including people in meetings and sharing information, like even even the board of directors decks we shared with a little sanitized, but we shared that with employees. So we were doing all that stuff before it was cool. And I think it's really been hijacked. We can move on to this other issue, but like I think it has been hijacked by a lot of like, self-interested kind of consultants and whatnot. And and we're in a world right now where um it's even now DEIB, where the B is belonging. And we can move on to this whenever you're ready. But the idea is that like I don't think belonging fits with DEI. It's a very different type of competency for a culture.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm interested. We'll dig into this a little bit before we get into the, I really am interested to, because you're one of the first individuals to kind of come out with the DEI report, diversity report. And I think a lot of people still don't understand, I guess, like the importance of it. So let's walk through some of the data points that you point out and why those were important in business. And then we're going to kind of talk about, we'll be going to transition to that belonging piece.
Sure. So, so first of all, when you're in a startup, you attract young people. When you attract young people, you attract much more liberal people, quite frankly. And liberal folks are just more aware of representation, and more aware of probably too much these days, but much more aware of like verbiage and all this other stuff. And quite frankly, if you want to get the best talent, you need to be serious about DEI, because you're trying to attract young people who are going to work their ass off in skills that you need. They want to see that you care about that stuff, and you're not kind of like race washing, if you will. I just made that word up, but like, or greenwashing is for climate change. So you're not just washing. So that's number one, is just like getting young people. You need to do that. The second one is, in order to make people feel seen, they need to see other people like them. And, if I had like, one woman on a team, she may not always speak up. But when she sees other folks like her, she's probably more likely to speak up. Now, that being said, I am not a supporter of these like race-based employee groups. I think those are not, and we can talk a little later about how to create a good group or good sub-community, but I don't think these race-based groups are any good, or religion or ethnic, whatever. Like, yeah. So those are the first two things, is recruiting and from a feedback perspective, or from a representation perspective. The third is that diversity is just good business. We were in the hospitality industry. Hospitality does not see color. And if we're going to serve, we had 6,000 paying customers. If we're going to serve 6,000 customers, then we need to, look like them, think like them. And I think from a customer representation perspective, it's very important. So those are the reasons why I believe in it.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you kind of mentioned is they're different kind of like segments, right? Of, you mentioned the three of them, and really trying to, how do you leverage them? Because you mentioned DI and belonging aren't the same, right?
Yeah.
So one, what are the key differences between DI and belonging, and how do they coexist?
Absolutely. So I like to think about it as two different things, the two main differentiators. The first one is, I think, as I just kind of follow up to what I just said, DEI is smart corporate strategy. And I spoke about the benefits of that, so I won't repeat it. Belonging is a feature of a great work culture. So again, DEI is like smart corporate
Yep.
direction, for the reasons I mentioned, and then belonging is part of a great culture.
Second Don,
thing,
I'm gonna give the folks a good example of what you just said, specifically
please.
on the strategic part. So DEI folks, you might hear a lot about employee resource groups, right? Employee resource groups
Yeah,
are,
that's what I was talking about, by the way. Yes.
yes. So employee resource groups. So I actually founded the OHSU Latino Employee Resource Group back in 2009. This is back before, I think, employee resource group. I didn't even know what employee resource was, to be honest with you. And essentially what it was is a group, because again, OHSU, we have now about 30,000 employees. And so essentially what it was is a group of, Latinos that are essentially trying to get together, trying to feel the sense of belonging, as Don kind of mentioned. And essentially what has occurred because of that is we started to become, better along. We started to kind of really network with each other, right? To the point now, we have a group of individuals from Nike, Intel, Moda, OHSU, all these different organizations throughout SAFE, all these different organs throughout Oregon, or organizations throughout Oregon, they now get together and like network, right? And share best practices. And we came together and we did a COVID education lecture talking about the vaccines. We also came together when Oregon had the massive fires in Phoenix and Talent. We donated about $10,000. Now, the reason this was strategically important, all of that, the fire displacement, all of the fundraising we did as an ERG, as our volunteer time collectively, with the organization's backing, was free marketing for our organizations. That thing went on the newspaper. It was all over the place. So strategically, they actually got a lot of earned media simply because they allowed our ERG a space to really kind of come together and do some meaningful work. They really wanted to allow us to fill our own cup. And because of that $500 maybe investment for the entire annual budget for the ERG, for them to do, little networking get-togethers, probably earned the organization close to $100,000 in just earned media alone, because not only was that broadcasted here in the Portland area, it was broadcasted up and down the I-5 corridor, because again, Medford, Oregon is about 4 hours south of here. And so these other organizations, the Intels, the Modas, they also shared it on their social media sites. So you're starting to see the importance of it. But it's also, I think, Don, to your point, ERGs are important because they were essentially created because there was no belonging, really. There was no sense of belonging. So sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. I thought it was just a great point.
That's a really great point, Gabriel, because I feel like we oftentimes do things because they make sense at the time, but we don't evolve to make sense with the current time. I'll give you an example. I don't want to share too much because it was shared in confidence with me, but there is an alumni group for a very famous president via WhatsApp. And after the LA fires, someone shared a list that said, here are the Black families that were displaced that need help. And just something did not sit right with me. I mean, if you're saying here are the poor families, or if you're saying here are the families without insurance, or if you're saying here are the senior citizens, that's fine. But the focus on race that continues to this day is just not healthy anymore. And I think the same is true for like sex. I mean, the focus on men are being more and more left behind. Yes, of course, we need to level the playing field, equal wage and all that. But men are suffering. And many of them feel like they have to withdraw or they have to radicalize. And that's when we get to the dangers of tribalism versus community. And I don't like the word tribalism because tribalism to me is around shared grievance, while community is around shared love. And I think that's the change. It's like a lot of stuff these days is based off resentment as opposed to like love. And that brings me to my second point of belonging. And that belonging is not an HR program. It's a managerial program. It has to happen at the team level. HR can't, like you ever go to Planet Fitness, there's a sign on the wall, you belong.
Yeah.
You go to Nets Arena, the Nets Stadium in Brooklyn, it says, we belong here. I mean, employees and colleagues and people see through that BS. They're like, really? I belong here where I'm busting my butt and that guy is, doing 5 hours maximum a day of work? Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And then we talk about performance culture. So it's up to the managers to create belonging on their teams. And it's up to HR to, ensure there are some DEI programs.
Now, how would you mentioned, obviously the differences. So let's talk about why fostering belonging is so much more important, especially more powerful and effective than DEI initiatives specifically.
Well, to be clear, excuse me, I think they need to coexist. And you see this in just all the news. I mean, so the latest news is that Apple is pushing back against its board and urging shareholders to vote against a proposal to drop DEI. But Apple excluded America's largest private employer, Walmart, announced they're moving to belonging. Um, McDonald's announced they're moving to belonging. Ford did it. Ford did it last summer. So it's happening. Amazon did it. So there's a culture of backlash, and sure, it's with times, and I think there's more radicalized government and all that. Um, and I think like places like X are toxic and they don't help. But they can coexist. And to me, belonging happens when people, and I have like a 5-step framework for this that's really easy, but belonging unlocks people's ability to be themselves and therefore contribute fully. I want to be clear though. If everyone belongs, no one belongs. And that's the problem in so many kind of cultures these days. And that's what happened. Why I think, the Democrats lost, quite frankly, to not to get political, but like they said, everybody belongs here. Like that's not true. Not everybody belongs in America. And then the other side was like, only these people belong here. Well, that's not true either. That's not the heritage of America. So people see through it, and that's why the center usually wins. And I think that a lot of folks get belonging wrong. Belonging is two pieces of a puzzle where you communicate to me that I'm a good fit and I see that I'm a good fit. And it's a virtuous cycle that gets better and better. As I feel belonging and I experience belonging, it kind of gets bigger.
Yeah, I love this. Before we come on the show, I mentioned my nonprofit, right? So folks that listen, you guys know Latino Founders right here in Portland, Oregon. You can go check out latinofounder.com. In fact, we'll have Don's 5 steps on the Shades of Entrepreneurship website. So go subscribe to the newsletter, theshadesofE.com. We'll go ahead and make sure that thing's on there. But one of the things I always get a lot of questions like, well, Latino Founders, you guys only help Latinos. It's like, well, no, I'm actually Hispanic. My ancestors are from Spain and I'm indigenous as well. And the individual just recently won was from El Salvador, and so our goal, again, Latinos created this nonprofit, certainly, but the goal is to really kind of amplify innovation in general. And one of the things that Don, you really mentioned as well, which I thought was very interesting, is a lot of people in the DEI space to kind of do it for own personal gains, right? Let's talk about DEI for, they can write their book, they can go on their autograph tours, they can do conferences and things of that nature. Our nonprofit is very specific about trying to create a sense of belonging, as Don mentioned, but really also to try to elevate and say, not only do you belong, but we believe in your innovation, thoughts, and ideas. And not only do we believe in it, let's put some weight behind it so then we can actually help support our local economies, right? Because at the end of the day, America's built on this back of small businesses, right? These small entrepreneurs, these small little businesses. So if we can kind of continue to get them, and one of the things I was talking to Don about was our goal is to scale 100 businesses to $1 million recurring revenue. Now, $1 million ARR, the reason that is important is, as we were talking about it earlier, is it allows that entrepreneur to pay their employees a wage, a competitive wage, but also market value. Then Don, what did you tell me after that? You said something really good.
I think $1 million is just a marker of like where it's a little harder to fail. It proves product market fit, as we talked about, and it just kind of it communicates like it's just a really big milestone. I feel like.
Yep, and I agree,
especially recurring.
Yeah, and it's again, the innovation is important because again, there's at the end of the day, Starbucks wouldn't be here if Steve Jobs didn't take a trip over to Italy, or not Steve Jobs, but the Howard Schwartz. If he didn't go over to Italy or Milan, right, and check out the coffees, then you would never have Starbucks. Right.
I want to comment on what you said because I think it's really important. And there's 2 things there with Latino Founders. The first is that you guys employ conscious exclusivity, and I don't think that's a problem. I think that's actually a feature of a really good of belonging, because like I said, if everybody belongs, no one belongs. So you need to be conscious about who you include. The second piece is you pass what I refer to as the qualifier test for group membership, and that is not just like, oh, we're a bunch of Latinos. We're Latinos from all over, And so that's number one. There's an identifier. There's another identifier, we're entrepreneurs. There's a third identifier that we're committed to growth. There's a fourth identifier that we are committed to the economy. There's a fifth identifier that we're local. And all these things are really important criteria that fuel their conscious exclusivity, but create a sense of belonging. Because again, you need multiple qualifiers to make sure everybody belongs. It's like for everybody who's been to a conference, you go to a conference and you stop at, there's like a reception and you talk to somebody, he's like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, because a lot of conferences will take anybody they can get. And a lot of planners are lazy and they don't put good programs in place. Uh, but that's kind of like, so conscious exclusivity is a really important part of creating belonging.
Now, how do you work with individuals to kind of work them through understanding the differences between DI and belongings, and then more importantly, to kind of get them on the right path?
Sure. So this is what my book is essentially all about. It's about, so I'm not like a consultant. I'm not selling any services. I'm not, even if you offered me money to consult, I wouldn't take it. My next venture is retreat centers. That's what I care about, is creating belonging on teams. And the first one's here in Boise, Idaho, 11 rooms, 3 meeting spaces, you know, pretty awesome, um, for retreats and offsites. So this is what my book's all about. My book is about a person. So because I had a liquidity event and I had the resources and the time because COVID happened, and I had this like, when I sold my business, all my belonging was gone. I mean, I got it from my business, and there's different paths to belonging, and they were all met through my business, whether it's friends, whether it's self-esteem, whatever. So I took this time and I essentially found my own sense of belonging, and I decided to just codify it into a process because I'm a very process oriented person. So essentially, my book does that because it's called The Quest because it leads individuals through finding their sense of belonging, and I present a few tools to do that. The first one is figuring out what your belonging fuel tank looks like. Where do you get your sense of belonging today, right now? And what you'll find is the average person has 7 kind of belonging fuels, and the range is 2 to 17, and there is empty space in that tank if you kind of assign percentages to each of those fuels. And that empty space represents opportunity for more belonging. Because a lot of people are doing things that may not necessarily fill their belonging tank. And that brings me to my second tool, which is your belonging archetypes. There's 4 belonging archetypes. If you go to belongingquest.com, you can take a quiz for free. I'll tell you exactly what to do. And there's chimps who are eager, there are meerkats who are anxious, there are snow leopards who are reluctant, and there are wolves who are independent. And based off of this persona, you get to essentially choose the fuels that are most likely to work for you. And um, and that's essentially the process. So I believe people need to go on a personal journey to find belonging first before they try to seek it through their workplace. Because workplaces are transactional and moving more so in that direction post COVID in a remote world or whatever. And your individual belonging is not going to go anywhere. So your individual belonging is your safety net, while your professional belonging is temporary. And of course, it can augment it. And work can be a platform for finding belonging through friendships, romantic relationships, group membership, and so on.
Moving, where do you see, like, you got a lot of people probably listening. In fact, there's probably a lot of folks that kind of fall in some of those buckets that you kind of explained earlier, like the males that maybe feel that they're out of displaced, right? And maybe there's other individuals that, how would, in the next couple of maybe some things that they can do at home right now, what are some tips that kind of help them think about outside? You mentioned the 7 buckets. And again, folks, subscribe to shadesofview.com. We're going to have this information on the newsletter. They'll also be on the website. So we'll make sure this information is on there. But what are some things they can do today that might be able to kind of help them move forward, to kind of get over this feeling of they don't belong?
Yeah. What a fantastic question. So I think the first thing is realizing that they're not alone. There is a belonging crisis in America. The Surgeon General has warned us about it for the last 3 years. He's referred to it as the loneliness epidemic. Uh, there is a belonging crisis. We are probably more separated than we've ever been politically. You look at what's referred to as sorting, where people are moving to places that are more aligned with their political beliefs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've heard that, but yes.
referred to as sorting. So the first thing is you're not alone. The second thing is that, like any kind of self help thing, the Stoics said, know thyself. And I first of all believe that life's work is to develop. I'm Jewish, and in Jewish there's the idea of the neshama, which is the soul, and Jews believe that your job on earth is to further improve your soul, so that when it leaves you and you die, it's in a better place. And so therefore, I subscribe to the idea that life is about the work, the growth, and so on. And so I think you just need that kind of mindset. And some people may not have that, and like, this is not for you. But I believe everybody has it, by the way. They just need to tap into it. And I think the first step is to like elevate your consciousness. Talk about this in the book. Elevate your consciousness level to the point where you want to do the work and you're not just sitting in anger or pride or desire. So the first step is realize you're not alone. It's an epidemic. The second step is kind of commit to like why you're doing it. And then the third step is literally thinking, is what I call it, adopting a belonging mindset, which is essentially thinking about everything from a belonging lens. Does this give me a sense of belonging? And what does that mean, actually? What that means is, do I feel seen? Do I feel valued? Can I contribute? Is this a good fit? Am I getting indications this is a good fit? And I walk people through the 5 C's of like belonging. And it's like literally a test. Like, is this giving me all the stuff that I need? Is it charging me, giving me energy? Do I want to communicate it to other people? And so on and so forth. So really just think about the stuff they do in the 24 hours they're alive every day and whether it fills their tank, so to speak. Does it give them a sense of belonging? And explore new things. Because the other thing I'll say, Gabriel, is that because there are 6 paths to belonging, it's not just like this traditional, go make friends. It's not that. And it's not also what experts like, Brene Brown or Eckhart Tolle say is just kind of introspection. Those are all parts of it. But there are other paths to belonging, like parasocial bonds, where you connect with, um, characters in novels or in TV shows. There are, or even influencers, when you're part of that community, which by the way is thrown too much, but anyway, that word's thrown way too much. But there are many ways to find belonging, including going to events, by the way. Going to a music festival is scientifically proven to make people more kind for up to a year after they attended.
Interesting.
So there are many ways to find it, and you just got to figure it out and experiment. And I walk people through this very easily.
No, I love this. I love the way you're kind of like frameworking it, because I this last kind of year, folks, I've gone through my own kind of journey of belonging. So some of the tactics I have done, because I really love, Don, I really love what you're saying, because networking, really starting the Latino founders community, starting this podcast was really kind of the first iteration, because this podcast was actually started during the pandemic for multiple reasons. One, I was going to Syracuse University, grad school. I was paying, $100,000 for grad school, and it was online. I'm reading case studies on Harvard Business Review of like the trials and tribulations of entrepreneurs while our community is getting decimated throughout the pandemic. So I'm like, why don't I create a podcast, learn the trials and tribulations from our local entrepreneurs, while I'm also broadcasting what we're doing here locally, hopefully bring a little attention to our community and try to create, some engagement with our economy, right? Another thing.
Sorry to interrupt, but that right there is actually a belonging path. So that's referred to as the self-esteem path. And that's through recognition, validation, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's how some people create a sense of belonging.
And I tell you that actually boosted my confidence to the point, because of that podcast. A year and a half later, we have the nonprofit. We've now raised, close to over $1 million in less than 2 years. We've helped over, I think it's over about 55 different Latino businesses already within that 2-year span. And then you pointed out the networking events. Literally tonight, I'm going to an event here in Oregon. I've got another one on Thursday that I'm going to. And before, I never really felt comfortable with these events. It took me some time to get to this point of it's almost like a sense of vulnerability. You're kind of putting yourself out there a little bit, but you're not. You're just kind of meeting people. But the sense of like I don't want to jump out of my cave yet. I don't feel like I'm part of that ecosystem. It definitely feels like you kind of are in a shell. But once you get out there and you realize like, no, there's actually a lot of people that are very like-minded like me that are interested in to hear my story, and their stories are very interesting as well. And you start to feel like, okay, the confidence is starting to come, and I'm starting to feel it myself. I make my bed every day now. I work out quite a bit. Just like little things that have been starting to change throughout my life. Like I mentioned, Don, at the beginning of this conversation, it's taken about 30 years, 35 years for me to feel comfortable saying, hey, my name is Gabriel, not Gabe. And that's for me, folks, that is a big, big transition. These are all things. And I think to Don's point, I'm starting to realize throughout this conversation is because I have that feeling, that sense of belonging now. I feel confident and comfortable. And because of that confidence and comfortability is coming, my innovation's coming, my drive for success is coming, my love for my community. Like Don mentioned, I'm very much of a believer. My parents have taught me, leave it better than you found it. Right. And so kind of to you mentioned your Jewish beliefs and what that word means to you, right? Kind of very much the same way. You want to do really good work, so you leave in a good path. And it's pretty much the same thing, folks. And again, you don't have to be religious. All as I'm saying is if you believe in yourself, good things will happen because you have that sense of belonging. Whether it be Catholicism, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, whatever religion you want to go to, they all pretty much have a really good message. And that is really do kind to others and kind things will happen to you kind of thing. And I kind of feel like that's kind of the ethos that you're kind of portraying.
Gabriel, in my book, there's like 4 stages to belonging. And the first and it's named after like climbing a mountain. And the first stage is trailhead. And in trailhead, when you get to the trailhead of a trail, it's like, okay, orienting, I got to go this way, I got to go that way, a rest area, whatever. And, one of the things I talk about is, figuring out your higher power. And I know this is like so like trite and like everybody does it. But what I do and the way I do is kind of original is I have a graphic where I let people kind of see what their view of the universe is and then giving them the word for their higher power. Like literally, if you take the exercise, it's like, okay, because there's a really interesting, I talk about this in the book. There's a really interesting conversation with this rabbi leader from LA. And he talks about, I meet people all the time, especially Jews, like, especially Reform Jews. They're like really atheists. And he's like, I meet people all the time and they're like, I'm an atheist. And he's like, okay, well, what do you believe in? And they always have an answer for that. He says, like, I believe in nature. I believe in consciousness. I believe in love. I believe in the universe. I believe in energy. Okay. So you believe in something. Those are synonymous with God or whatever you want to call it. I do believe that you have to have this kind of like some sort of belief because that's pretty grounding and that's really new for me. And I've only been able to develop that, first of all, after October 7th and the massacre in Israel brought me closer to Judaism, but also because I'm in a 12-step program. And being in a 12-step program, it is, kind of like a necessity. So anyway, I really like what you said. And I think everybody can find some sort of path to faith.
Yes, I completely agree. So Don, you have your book out. If folks are interested in learning more about you, maybe they want to connect with you, where can they find your book outside of subscribing to theshadesofE.com? The newsletter will have it. Where can they find your book? Where can they connect with you? Are they on LinkedIn? Where's the website? Where can they find more information?
Absolutely. So I made a note, by the way, to send you all these graphs and stuff. So absolutely,
Sweet.
They'll be in the newsletter and they'll be in a very easy format.
Perfect.
If you want to check out like a preview of the book, you can go to belongingquest.com. Or you can go to my personal website where I talk a little more about all the stuff I'm up to at danjberger.com, D-A-N-J like in Joseph, Berger, B-E-R-G-E-R.com. And obviously happy to connect with anybody who reaches out. I generally take any meeting that comes my way, probably too many. But that's kind of how I get belonging is I help my self-esteem path and my service path.
I love it. In fact, I was getting ready to queue up a message because I'm flying out to Missouri next week for the folks that are anybody out in Kansas City that want to network. Although this obviously will air a little bit later the next week, but I'm certainly going to be posting a message on a LinkedIn page. So again, folks, connect with me on LinkedIn, Mr. Gabriel Flores as well. I believe Don is also on LinkedIn, so make sure you connect with him as well. But again, networking and building a community, building this ethos of belonging. I really like that sense of what you're trying to say, and I'm starting to see how the DEI and the belonging piece do vary, but they're also, like you mentioned, they need to coexist, right?
Yes.
But it's also important that you kind of understand their strengths and where it shouldn't be applied, right? Because that would be considered one of their weaknesses.
Yeah, I want to say just two things. First of all, yes, that's right. And the thing about DEI is, unfortunately, is that it's become exclusionary, and it can't be exclusionary, and it needs to include everybody. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is that as it relates to networking, I like to think, and again, there's not a lot. Like, I have some original thoughts, I have many non-original thoughts. That's why my book there's 120 works cited. So this is built off of academic research. This is certainly not much of it is not mine. I've just kind of coalesced it. But I would say there's something I talk about, which is life's kind of crossroad moments. And as we grow older, we have less of those. So I really like what you said about networking, despite like the baggage that word has, but really taking advantage of the potential crossroad opportunities, because as we grow older, we'll have less of them. So for example, when your kids start a new school, you can meet new parents, but you're going to eventually become an empty nester, and that won't exist anymore. When you start a new job, it's another crossroad moment. So anyway, it's really important to leverage those, I think, from a networking perspective.
And Don, you just shook me to the bone with the parent teacher conference being empty nester someday. Cause I'm like just going to the school, and every time I drop off the kid, I'm like, oh man, haven't changed. I don't want to talk to anybody right now. I'm still like, I haven't got my coffee. I got coffee breath on me. It's like, oh yeah, it's kind of funny because once you mentioned that, I'm realizing, we do have very limited amount of time to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's limited time, obviously, but also limited opportunities. I mean, one thing you can do is saying, you read somebody, I see you all the time. Do you want to grab a coffee someday? Or if you have coffee, let's go to a drive through or whatever. Like, if you need a cup of coffee, go do it with somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, last question I had, you mentioned you were be working on the retreats. Tell me a little bit about the retreats real quick. And then who would be like the ideal customer for your retreat, and where can we learn more about that?
Thank you for asking. So, I, having been in the meetings industry and the hospitality industry, and building, an employee-led company, if you will, I really value small meetings. And I think the biggest things happen in the smallest rooms. When you're setting goals for the year, when you're reviewing the previous year, you're not sitting in a town hall with all your employees. You're there with your executive team or your, leadership team or whatever. So I really believe in small meetings. They've most of the time been neglected by many people in the hospitality industry, just because they want to close big deals. They want to fill up the hotel. They don't want to. So we're creating unique spaces for small teams. Our first location is Boise, Idaho. The goal is 20 by 2030 if Boise is successful. And yeah, it's exclusive use. So you get the whole thing, no matter how many people you have, and it's purpose built for meetings. And, it's ideal for corporate retreats, team building, offsites, and even lifestyle retreats. Like if there's entrepreneurs who make money off of like masterminds or whatever workshop they're running, absolutely. We'll take some of the, risk, by the way, with those, because we know they're slightly more limited in resources. But yeah, assemblehospitality.com is where you can find us.
Perfect. And again, I love that. In fact, I keep on thinking like a lot of the yoga folks in particular, because they do a lot of the retreats and things of that nature. The psychedelic folks, you're starting to see a lot of individuals in the psychedelic world. Boise, Idaho folks, if you have not been out to the beautiful Boise, Idaho, they're just right. There are neighbors here in Oregon. Beautiful outdoor scenery. I can also see individuals, if you get the kayaks and the water boards. I mean, again, there's so much you can do. So again, folks, this information will be on theshadesofE.com.
Yeah, Boise is the team capital of the world, team building capital of the world, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, it's a gorgeous area. I love it. So in fact, Don, if you're ever out here in Portland, please look me up. And I will do the same out there in Boise. And again, folks, please subscribe to us at theshadesofE.com. You can also follow us on the social media channels at The Shades of E. And this conversation will be available on YouTube, and it'll be available a week early for those Patreon members. So go ahead and check out our Patreon page. For $5 a month, you'll get every access to the actual conversations, transcriptions, and all sorts of fun stuff. And I also try to throw out some deals for sweaters and things of that nature to help support the podcast, keep moving forward. So Don, thank you again so much. Are there any last words you have before we leave?
No, I just, I really appreciate your thoughtful approach to these questions and your contribution to the conversation. Thank you so much.
No, I appreciate it because, again, I've learned something new today because, again, I've been in the DI space quite a bit, and I didn't know that what I've been actually reaching for was the belonging, and you kind of helped kind of define it for me. So I really do appreciate it. And again, folks, you don't, like as Don mentioned, you don't have to have a religion, but go to him, check out his tests. He will give you your word, a word that really kind of resonates with you. Because again, if you believe in something, right, you have to believe in yourself before you can believe in anything. So believe in yourself first, and you'll make a dramatic difference in this world. So again, folks, please subscribe at theshadesofE.com. Thank you, and have a great night.
Thank you for tuning in to the Shades of Entrepreneurship. For more information, please follow the Shades of E on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or visit theshadesofE.com.